Thanks, Rachel, and thanks everyone for joining. We've got the topic today being the benefits of segmentation, so security-related topic in our Trying to Watch webinar series here. This has been a message that's been resonating very well with the folks that we talk to around leveraging the network to help be kind of a point of control from a security standpoint, and there's some definite benefits to being able to do that in certain use case scenarios that we'll walk through. So quickly, the agenda here today, I want to talk through the challenge, some of the security challenges that we have here, and how we can solve those via different types of network-based segmentation. So looking at network segmentation kind of holistically, then at the perimeter, and then data center or internal segmentation, and then kind of more of a hot topic around microsegmentation and what that means and what those benefits are there. So with that, I'll go ahead and just jump right into some of these challenges. I think a big one, to start off with is just that in a lot of organizations, the security team is really responsible for maintaining that traditional CIA level of security in the organization. But the issue is that they don't always own a lot of those points in the network or the endpoints or the infrastructure that's in place to be able to enforce that security. So what we want to do is really kind of look through different ways that we can leverage security technologies or architectures to help maintain that security posture without really having any impact to the business. So what we're going to walk through here is a way to do that. We've seen a lot of these benefits coming from application security management, kind of the processes you take to secure your applications, to secure your data, your servers, and also kind of another one of the big topics right now in security being ransomware. So this is something that can help alleviate those two issues along with some other challenges that we have. So I think the big one really that pertains to this is how do we protect those endpoints, because the endpoint essentially is where that data rests. That's really the point, the target of any malicious attack. So how do we protect those endpoints when we can't necessarily always update them or patch them or install our advanced malware protection or antivirus solutions onto those? So some of those scenarios being vendor-owned and operated systems that don't allow you to touch the endpoint, or certain areas of the business that own their own assets that aren't under corporate control. We'll also see certain application servers, things in the data center that can't take that downtime to be able to patch those and get those up to the right security level that we need them to. So really the solution that we have that's been really successful is to utilize the network as that enforcement point as traffic tries to reach those endpoints. So we can go ahead and enforce those antivirus, the IPS features, zero-day malware, et cetera, without ever having to affect the end systems themselves, which is a huge benefit to us to be able to do that, kind of take that security at a separate layer and enforce those controls. The goal of really doing that is to try and utilize a zero trust model, so making sure that we can apply those proper restrictions to get that best security possible. So when we look at zero trust, a model that we've got a bunch of vendors and partners that are trying to help get to, what we're trying to do is really secure that access to those critical systems, so make sure that those resources are accessed in a secure manner regardless of location. So whether you're on-prem on the campus network, within the data center, mobile users, partner connections, we want to make sure that we can secure those no matter where you're at, and really apply that least privilege or need to know restrictions. So the point of being able to know, I know who you are, I know which applications you're trying to reach, and I can restrict it so that you really don't have any more access than what you're required to do your specific role or your function. And that comes down to really a lot of visibility and verifying that those users and applications are legit, and the content coming across the network is verified as well. And that last part of zero trust being able to kind of historically look back at records of access and records of activity to know how long something may have been happening or when it first occurred. And that's really another point of where leveraging the network to do this for us, we kind of have those logging capabilities. There's lots of integrations into SIM appliances and things like that, specifically for firewalls, that will help us record this information and have that that data long term. So really looking at this as the end goal of getting that zero trust security policy in place. So to talk specifically through network segmentation, if you look at it just kind of by definition here, it's probably already happening in a lot of organizations. That definition is really more of a networking term to say, we've got separate VLANs, we've got separate subnets, different areas in the network that have specific functions, but there isn't always restrictions involved in that. It's just another network to place applications in. Another thing that we see with that too, and this is very typical especially in the data center, where we'll see server VLAN 1, server VLAN 2, server VLAN 3, but there's really no differentiation between what the applications are in those points in the network. So what Burwood tries to talk about and to try and help organizations is to really organize that network based on function. So if we know that a certain segment of the network is for an HR application versus some other business application, we can apply those proper restrictions at that network level. So really the beginning is really about organizing our network before applying those restrictions. And I know a lot of times this is something that internally can scare a lot of people away. There's a lot of effort that goes into understanding how those networks are laid out and what restrictions need to be put in place. But I like to start with kind of the perimeter, because really we are already doing this in most of our networks, right? The perimeter is a point that it's almost standard now that every organization you walk into, they've got their internal network. There's a zone that has the internet on it, and there's a DMZ that sits in between that has some type of restricted access to the internet, some type of restricted access internally for what it can access. And this really is essentially that network segmentation and that zero trust model applied in most organizations. So we've got that zero trust model in place to deny that access from the internet directly to the inside of our network. We're restricting internet to the DMZ based on application. Even if we don't have a next generation firewall, we still have those restrictions to say we're only allowing certain ports into certain applications, because we know that the internet being the big bad scary place that it is, we need to make sure that we're only allowing what's necessary into those networks. And then also from the DMZ to the inside, there's usually restrictions so that those servers can only get their updates and their patches where applicable. So we've got those pieces in place in the perimeter. So what I try and make is a correlation between what we're doing at the perimeter to what we want to do internally and what we might want to do from a microsegmentation perspective. The idea essentially is still the same. So those methods are in place now. We just need a way to help push those further internal to our network. So, and a big driver for that is when we look at the perimeter and the amount of traffic we have in our network, we have those security features in place on the perimeter, but really there's a company that was called Arkin, was recently acquired by VMware, who does a lot of analysis on network and traffic flows. And the reality is that of all the traffic on your network, packets going in every which direction, east-west, north-south, staying internal, going to the internet, it's roughly only 20% of that traffic that leaves or goes through a perimeter firewall. So only 20% of that traffic, even we even have the ability to put any type of restrictions on. That's 80% of the traffic that might stay internal, that's unfiltered, unrestricted, not secure at all. There's no enforcement points that are in there. So that being a lot of traffic, there's kind of been a mindset, I think, in the past of, protect the perimeter to a point that it's good enough. There's a big wall there that nothing internal is malicious, and I think that's really just not true anymore. There's a lot of more threat. There's more threat vectors. There's more ways in which threats can get into the network, and that really leads us to need to protect that internal network much more, and especially with the statistics like this, that being a large amount of the traffic that we have, we need to make sure that it's definitely secured. And I like to start that with really an example. I think sometimes there might be kind of that fear, uncertainty, and doubt. There's that fear of like, hey, there's going to be some type of malicious activity on the network, and might not really believe that it's happening, but it is. It's happening more and more, and we have some of those examples of organizations that we've worked with that have been hit with this, and one that's happened in the last year or so is a healthcare customer that had a virus that came in through an Internet Explorer vulnerability, so just a typical user out on the floor accessing the internet. Vulnerability downloaded a virus, and that virus was able to spread through file shares and spread through the rest of the network and really start impacting more and more devices. And the reason for that is that there's really no restrictions, right? There's nothing internally to stop one user segment from talking to another user segment and talking to the data center. In this particular example, their endpoint protection software was able to detect this virus, but didn't have the intelligence or the ability to prevent any of the activity. So essentially it was saying, hey, there's something going on here, we need to take a look at it, but it was still propagating. They were able to take those devices off the network. They could clean the device. They could go through and say, okay, we know exactly what this is now. We can remove this. The device is clean. But then as soon as they put it back on the network, it would get hit again because of how quickly that malware was spreading. And this is kind of a big concern with ransomware specifically, where maybe the infection on a single endpoint might not be that detrimental to the organization, but once it gets in, that spreading, or with ransomware, as it starts to encrypt those file shares and encrypt more internal devices, that's really where that cost comes into play, and that's really where the headaches start. So what we're really trying to do with data center segmentation or internal segmentation in general is limit that propagation of malware. Hopefully it will stop it, again, being another enforcement point for it to ever even get there, but definitely if there is an infection, if there is an outbreak, it won't spread. I think a good analogy to this is a customer of ours, I think, put it perfectly in how they kind of talked about it as being the concept of network bulkheads. So if you think about a boat has different compartments in it, so that if the side of the boat was punctured, you did hit something, and water starts to flood into the boat, it's compartmentalized and the whole boat doesn't sink. There's just one section of the boat that's flooded with water. And that's essentially what we're trying to do here in the network side as well. So if we do have some type of outbreak or some type of infection, if it does hit a system, it might stay within that one subnet, within that one network that that particular host was on, but it doesn't propagate to the entire network, and it doesn't go through our entire organization and really cause a lot of havoc. We can contain it into one spot of the network so we can remediate from there. So I think that analogy is really a good one to kind of drive home the purpose of this data center network segmentation. So really, generic diagram here, but it's really about preventing that propagation of malware. So making sure that it's not going to spread across the WAN, it's not going to spread across to all of our other endpoints. Some of the kind of auxiliary benefits to this also include just increased visibility. There's a lot of blank spots in the network when you kind of go internally. Again, kind of going back to that, assume everything internal is good traffic or non-malicious. If we start putting some devices internally and start monitoring that traffic and really taking a look, we'll see more activity than we think. Systems that probably just shouldn't be talking to each other, possible malicious activity, just a lot of that visibility is what we want as security professionals, is to, we really can't protect it if we can't see it. So even being able to put this in place without the true security features of IPS and antivirus and different features like that, we can still increase our security by just knowing what's traveling through our network. So being able to see that is a huge step in that next step in security. And it really lends itself to eventually going to granular traffic restrictions. So I'll have more on this in a couple of slides, but really we want to start to set that framework for, once we get the visibility, let's start the prevention, and let's start restricting that access, similar to what we do with the DMZ, where we only allow what's necessary. Internally, we know it's a little bit more difficult. There's a lot more analysis to be done to understand which workstations are talking to which servers are talking to each other. There's a lot of network mapping that has to go on, and really application mapping to understand what that is if we ever wanted to get to the point of truly giving those granular restrictions. So we'll talk through a process about that in a second here. But this slide, I always laugh at this one, but it's really over generalized here. But really the idea is that if we can start being a little more organized, a little bit more intelligent about what we're putting into these certain sections of our network, it's going to be easier for us to apply those security policies to them, again, without ever having to touch the endpoints themselves. Now, I'm not advocating that we take antivirus off of the endpoints or don't protect those. That's still necessary, but we see a lot of times where, like I mentioned earlier, can't take the downtime, or we don't actually own those endpoints. It's vendor controlled, vendor operated, that type of thing. This will allow us to at least apply that security in front of those systems so that we can have that visibility and that protection that we want. So really overgeneralized, but really it's about organizing the network. It's making sure we're putting those applications where they need to go and applying those proper restrictions as we move forward. I have an example here. This is just one example of a business use case for industrial control systems. So manufacturing and SCADA, energy management, those types of organizations have a particular use case that makes a lot of sense to how this data center segmentation works. So in those networks, what we're looking at here towards the top is really your traditional business environments. Office space, workers that have their workstations, they communicate into the data center, not a whole lot of, it's all under corporate control, not a whole lot of stuff that's sitting there that's not owned or operated by your central IT staff. What's interesting about this particular vertical and many others is that there's a whole nother set of systems that really run those manufacturing machines, run those SCADA systems that aren't procured through your traditional central IT organizations. They're owned by individual plants. They're owned by individual sections of the business that need to have their workstations. They need to have their file servers. They need to have their own data to make sure that those machines can run. So what we really want to do is, since those aren't owned or operated and there's so many devices, we need to segment those from the rest of the business network. So you've got the critical data that runs the business and the enterprise services out towards the top of this diagram, and you have separate systems down towards the bottom that just help operate those individual locations. Now, there is some interaction that has to happen between those two. If we've got some central office folks that are responsible for running these plant locations, they got to have that access to look at that data and to be able to do their analytics and things like that. But we don't want those insecure, unmanaged, unpatched devices to affect anything happening at the business. So this is where that data center segmentation allows us to place a firewall between the enterprise network and the process control network, kind of the industry term for how those operations work. Allows us to have that visibility. Why are devices on that process control network reaching out to our enterprise? Why is the enterprise reaching back into those networks? If there is a compromise from one of those unpatched, unmanaged systems, let's detect that. Let's find those viruses on the wire, look for those vulnerabilities. We can really see kind of those threat vectors and those attack mechanisms happening by placing a device just between those networks. It's really non-intrusive. There is some downtime, obviously, associated to implementing a new solution like this, but with the proper design, the proper methodology, it doesn't have to be very impactful. In this particular example, we've got some customers that gave us very small windows, 20, 30-minute windows to be able to implement this, and we were able to do it flawlessly through the methodology that we use. So this is an example just with ICS, but very similar in healthcare or financial services, where we want to make sure that we can kind of isolate certain parts of the network, certain parts of the business behind our security appliances. That methodology is really key to this. I think kind of going back again to kind of that fear of doing internal segmentation or internal security really goes to how do you approach getting something like this in place. And for us, I think what happens is we'll see a lot of organizations that will try to do too much too fast. So they want to immediately apply that segmentation. They want to apply those advanced security controls. They want to do the restrictions. And it's really a lot to kind of manage and navigate on that one bang, one migration, one cutover window. So what we've been advocating, and this has been very successful for us, is to make sure we've got those designs and plans in place for how we want the network to be organized, so which applications need to sit where, how do we want to secure those. And then when we actually go through installing these services, this first bubble here on the left is really just putting those devices in place. So this is mostly next generation firewalls that we've been using to be able to secure these. And all we're trying to do is place that firewall either transparently or as a layer 3 gateway between our isolated networks and our enterprise network. So being able to do this, we're not applying restrictions right away. We're not even really applying those true security features. All we're trying to do is make sure that we've got that visibility. We've got the network topology working and running appropriately to limit that downtime. Like I mentioned, we've done this in 20 to 30 minutes in certain cases where we've got that planning down. We're just going to put these devices in place, let them see the network, let them see the traffic, let's get a bigger picture of what's truly going on, not just what we're assuming, so that we can kind of go through a phased approach of increasing that security, which is kind of going to that second bubble here on the slide, which is now talking through, once we've got it in place, we've got the visibility, it's pretty easy for us to turn on those security features so we can start doing zero-day malware detection, signature-based antivirus, vulnerability protection. Those features should be easy for us to turn on and manage at a later date so that we've got more time to monitor any type of false positives that might come up or any type of restrictions to that normal business or normal data flow. So that allows us to get these in here in place properly. And then after that, it's really about us starting to apply those restrictions. We'll have tons of log data now. We'll know what traffic is going through. We can start to really restrict that access to know here's only the applications we need, here's the user groups that we might need, here's all that's really necessary to make the business run through these networks. And then from there, it kind of always goes down to a steady state. Once it's in place, we think it's good. I always say that security never ends. You're never going to have one big project and check box, yep, you've got security. We need to make sure that we continue to review these, make sure that those policies haven't changed, that there haven't been any new devices added, make sure we can stay on top of that. And that really helps with also implementing new security features that come out, those health checks, making sure we're staying on point and on task, and really probably leveraging some type of managed service to make sure that that operating of these devices is maintained, that we're keeping up to date on those OS levels and those new feature requests. So those features are key to making sure that this is really a full loop of implementation and increasing that security as we go along. Now, this next slide is a little bit of a change up. So everything we just talked through is internal segmentation, data center segmentation, a couple of different names for it. But what that's really designed to do is restrict north-south traffic. So traffic coming into a network, coming into your data center, going into your process control network, into a network that hosts maybe your EMR and healthcare or some critical financial applications for financial customers. But what that's really going to allow us to do is that higher level, bigger picture restrictions into or out of a certain point in our network. Microsegmentation is really gaining a lot of traction, and really what the difference here is looking at north-south traffic versus east-west traffic. So as we continue to virtualize our environments and move more of that physical infrastructure into virtual environments, we kind of start to lose some of that visibility. So, 5 years ago, big push to virtualize everything. We put them all where we have multiple virtual machines sitting on a single host. If those devices are communicating to one another, that traffic never leaves that physical host, and we really lose that visibility. So we lose that ability to apply traffic restrictions to see what's truly happening in the network. And that's really what microsegmentation is all about. Like, let's get that visibility back, and then let's also start to try and implement the virus, the malware, the IPS features into this. So it's really allowing us to take the security controls that we're used to and then kind of push those into the virtual environment to regain that visibility. So these next couple slides are just really trying to help and capture that. So if we look at this gray bubble as being an individual host, so not even just our entire virtual data center, but an individual host. If we have a VM that's compromised, that malware can propagate within that host from VM to VM with no access restrictions whatsoever, no security in place. So we might even have those data center firewalls that are doing that north-south traffic and restrictions into there. But still, if something slips by, it's going to be free reign for it to move around within that virtual environment. So we really want to be able to understand where that's at, be able to have that visibility across all these dark lines. And up until recently, it's been very difficult for us to get that visibility. But there's new products out there, new solutions that allow us to do this microsegmentation and really allow us to have essentially a firewall for every VM. It doesn't quite work like that. You're not deploying individual firewalls. The policies are a little bit different, but we can apply those restrictions into that virtual environment without buying physical firewalls, without having to really, this is for east-west again, not having to have specific physical firewalls to do this east-west traffic. We don't have to really manipulate the network in terms of routing and switching to be able to get that traffic to flow out of our virtual environments to a physical device for security purposes and then back into our virtual environment. This really allows us to keep those virtual security controls within our virtual environment, very similar to how we would do it on the physical layer. So it's really great for us to gain that visibility. It's great for us to not have to really, again, tweak with the network, not have to mess with the endpoints themselves. So those individual VMs might be managed, owned, maintained by third-party vendors. That's still fine with us. We can still make sure that they're restricted traffic flow and that we've got that visibility between those VMs within that virtual environment. So really looking at what we're doing on the perimeter and not really overthinking that being what we want to implement internally, what we want to implement in our virtual environments really isn't as big of a challenge as I think it's been in the past. So segmenting this allows us to really start to organize our internal networks, which gives us that increased visibility, virtual environments, physical environments, north-south traffic, east-west traffic, really flowing in all directions, that visibility, and then being able to add those security features to do the prevention mechanisms that we really want to get to in our pathway to get to that zero trust network and all those access restrictions. So really helping us in visibility, helping with those network bulkheads, making sure that we're limiting that propagation of malware, and that we're really accounting for both physical and virtual networks and visibility into those. And really that key, that last point there, is that approach to getting this in place is really, really key. So making sure that we're not trying to do too much at once. Let's phase this out over time, especially for organizations that aren't doing any internal segmentation now. Let's plan for this. Let's take those first steps now. Let's take the next steps 6 months, a year from now. Let's make sure we plan this out in a phased approach, because again, security never ends. So let's start to get those things in place so we can get our networks where we want them to be and really start to apply the security controls that are necessary to mitigate against today's advanced and persistent threats. So I went through all that pretty quick. I did want to make sure that we have a lot of time for questions. This usually sparks a lot of conversation around deployment methodologies, around methods in which to implement this. Really looking for some feedback.
Okay, so everyone is unmuted. If you have any questions for Justin, feel free to speak up. Okay, well, if you don't have any questions, we will go ahead and end today's session. I'll be sending out the recording along with Justin's contact information, so if you have questions later on regarding the topic, feel free to reach out to him or myself. So with that, we'll close out. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Justin, for hosting.
Yep, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Everyone have a good day. Bye-bye.